Hi, boys and girls. Welcome back to Lesson 8, the Read Aloud for Wind in the Willows. And this chapter is called Mr. Toad. And if you remember, for your intro activity, you went through to find different phrases and words that really give us a sense of what's happening in the plot and the setting. So you can see here some of the things that I underlined are country lane, nightfall, thinking of supper, followed obediently, walking a little way ahead as was his habit, shoulders humped, eyes fixed, straight gray road, cool night air. All of these words and phrases help us get a better picture in our mind of what's happening in the story. So we are going to continue our read aloud. And when we think about narration, the voice the author uses to tell the narration part of the story is called the narrator. Narrators have their own personality that shows through in their style of storytelling. So the language and the words that they use cause us to see their personality. Today's chapter is called Mr. Toad. Think about what you remember about Mr. Toad from our read alouds prior to this. What kind of character is he? How does he treat his friends? And why are Mr. Toad's friends concerned about him? I think it's because he has so many accidents and crashes. Listen carefully as the narrator tells more about Mr. Toad and our story themes. So here we go. The Wind in the Willows, Mr. Toad. It was a bright morning in the early part of summer. The mole and the water rat had been up since dawn discussing the joys of boating. They were finishing breakfast when a heavy knock sounded at the door. The mole went to the door, and the rat heard him utter a cry of surprise. Then he flung the door open and announced, "Mr. Badger!" The badger strode into the room and stood looking at the two animals with an expression full of seriousness. "The hour has come," said the badger at last. "What hour?" asked the rat uneasily, glancing at the clock on the mantelpiece. "Whose hour, you should rather say," replied the badger. "Why, Toad's hour, the hour of Toad. I said I would take him in hand. Said I would take him in hand as soon as the winter was over, and I'm going to take him in hand today." "So if the winter is over, what season do you think it is?" "Toad's hour, of course," cried the mole delightedly. "It has been brought to my attention," continued the badger, taking an armchair, "that another new motor car will arrive at Toad Hall today. You two animals will accompany me to Toad Hall, and the work of rescue shall begin." "Right you are," cried the rat enthusiastically. They set off immediately on their mission of mercy. They reached Toad Hall to find a shiny new motor car parked in the driveway. As they neared the front door, it was flung open, and Mr. Toad, attired in his driving clothes, came swaggering down the steps. "Hello!" he cried cheerfully. "You're just in time to come with me for a jolly." Toad's words faltered as he noticed the stern look on the faces of his friends. The badger strode up the steps. "Take him inside," he said to his companions. Then, as Toad was hustled through the door, he turned to the chauffeur in charge of the new motor car. "I'm afraid you won't be wanted today," he said. "Mr. Toad has changed his mind." With that, the badger followed the others inside and shut the door. "Now then," he said to the Toad when the four of them stood together in the hall, "take those ridiculous things off." "Shan't," replied Toad with great spirit. Take them off him then, you two," ordered the badger. They had to lay Toad out on the floor before they could get to work properly. Then the rat sat on him, and the mole got his motor clothes off him bit by bit. "You knew it must come to this, Toad," the badger explained. "You've disregarded all the warnings we've given you. You've gone on squandering the money your father left you, and you're constantly getting into trouble with the police. You're getting us animals a bad name in the area. Now, you will come with me into the library, and there we will have a serious heart-to-heart." He took Toad firmly by the arm and led him into the library. After about 3/4 of an hour, the badger reappeared, solemnly leading by the paw a very dejected Toad. Just look at him sitting there in that chair. "Sit down there, Toad," said the badger kindly, pointing to a chair. "My friends," he went on, "I am pleased to inform you that Toad has seen the error of his ways." "That is very good news," said the mole gravely. "Very good news indeed," observed the rat dubiously. "If only—" He was looking very hard at Toad as he said this, and could not help thinking he perceived something like a twinkle in that animal's eye. "There's only one thing more to be done," continued the badger. "Toad, I want you to repeat, before your friends here, that you see the error of your ways." There was a long, long pause. Toad looked desperately this way and that. At last he spoke. "No," he said quite firmly, "I admit nothing." "What?" cried the badger. "Didn't you tell me just now, in there—" "Oh, yes, yes, in there," said Toad impatiently. I'd have said anything in there. You're so persuasive, dear badger." "Then you don't promise," said the badger, "never to touch a motor car again?" "Certainly not," replied Toad. "Told you so," observed the rat to the mole. "Very well, then," said the badger firmly. "We'll have to see what force can do. You've often asked us three to come and stay with you, Toad. Well, now we're going to. Take him upstairs, you two, and lock him up in his bedroom." Oh, my goodness. "We'll take great care of everything till you're well, Toad," said the mole as Toad was hauled up the stairs. "No more of those regrettable incidents with the police, Toad," said the rat as they thrust him into his bedroom and locked the door. They descended the stair, Toad shouting abuse at them through the keyhole, and the three friends sat down to discuss the matter. Shouting abuse is the British way of saying Toad was angrily yelling at the others and calling them names. "Toad must never be left unguarded," said the badger firmly. The mole and the rat nodded in agreement. They arranged watches accordingly. At first Toad resisted their efforts, but as time passed, however, he appeared to grow depressed. One fine morning, the rat, whose turn it was to go on duty, went upstairs to relieve Badger. "Toad's still in bed," Badger told the rat. "Now you look out, rat. When Toad's quiet and submissive, then he's at his trickiest." And with that warning, the badger departed. "How are you today?" inquired the rat cheerfully as he approached Toad. A feeble voice replied, "Thank you so much, dear Ratty. So good of you to inquire. But first tell me how you are yourself and the excellent Mole." "Oh, we're all right," replied the rat. "Mole," he added innocently, "is going out for a run with Badger. Now jump up and don't lie moping there on a fine morning like this." "Dear, kind rat," murmured Toad, "I can't jump up now, if ever. I hate being a burden, and I do not expect to be one much longer." "Well, I hope not too," said the rat heartily. "I'm a nuisance, I know," replied the Toad. "You are indeed," said the rat, "but I tell you, I'd take any trouble on earth for you, if only you'd be a sensible animal." "If I thought that, Ratty," murmured Toad, "then I would beg you to fetch a doctor." "Why, what do you want a doctor for?" inquired the rat. "Surely you have noticed of late," murmured Toad. "But no, why should you? Never mind, forget that I asked." "Look here," said the rat, beginning to get worried. "Of course I'll fetch a doctor if you really think you need one, but you can hardly be bad enough for that yet. Let's talk about something else." "I fear, dear friend," said Toad, "that talk can do little for me. And by the way, if you do fetch a doctor, would you mind fetching a lawyer too?" Do you think Toad really needs a doctor and a lawyer? Why do you think he's asking for them?" "A lawyer? Oh, gracious me!" the concerned rat said to himself as he hurried from the room, not forgetting, however, to lock the door behind him. Outside, he stopped only for a moment to consider Toad's behavior before running off to the village on his errand of mercy. As the key turned in the lock, the Toad hopped out of bed. Toad watched Rat from his window until he was out of sight. Laughing heartily, Toad dressed quickly in his best suit, filled his pockets with cash, and improvised a rope by knotting sheets from his bed together. Tying one end of the rope around the strongest part of his window, Toad slid lightly to the ground and, taking the opposite direction to the rat, marched off light-heartedly, whistling a merry tune. It was a gloomy luncheon for Rat when the Badger and the Mole returned. "He did it awfully well," said the crestfallen Rat. "How did you awfully well?" "He did you awfully well," replied the Badger hotly. "He's got clear away for now, and the worst of it is he'll be so conceited with what he'll think is his cleverness that he may commit any folly. But we'd better stay here. Toad may be brought back at any moment on a stretcher or between two policemen." Meanwhile, Toad was walking briskly along a main road. "Smart piece of work that," he remarked to himself. With this thought in mind, he strode along till he reached a little town where the sign of the Red Lion reminded him that he was hungry. He marched into the inn and ordered lunch. He was about halfway through his meal when a familiar sound made him jump. The glorious sound of a motor car could be heard in the inn yard. Before long, the owners of the motor car appeared in the inn. Eager to get a look at the vehicle, the Toad slipped out and sauntered round to the inn yard. "There cannot be any harm," he said to himself, "in my just looking at it." The car stood in the middle of the yard. Toad walked slowly round it. "I wonder if this sort of car starts easily," he said to himself. Next moment, hardly knowing how it came about, he was hurtling along in someone else's motor car. Oh, Toad. "To my mind," observed the chairman of the bench of magistrates, "the only difficulty that presents itself is how we can sufficiently punish this rogue. He has been found guilty of stealing a motor car, of driving dangerously, and of gross impertinence to the rural police. Mr. Clerk, will you tell us what is the stiffest penalty we can impose on this villain?" The clerk scratched his nose. "Supposing you were to say 12 months for the theft, and 3 years for the furious driving, and 15 years for the cheek. Those figures, if added together correctly, total up to 19 years. Cheek is a British word used to mean rude boldness." "First rate," said the chairman. "So you had better make it around 20 years, concluded the clerk. "An excellent suggestion," said the chairman. "Prisoner, it's going to be 20 years for you this time." Oh my goodness. We'll talk about the choices that Toad has made.